took Rebecca's test on what religion you're most like now, came out as humanism, because I saw the human side of the scriptures and how the scriptures were developed from a human side, not so much from a religious side, is how I started to see it. So, but I'm guessing everyone has a little bit different way, but I'll talk about that. I'll talk about your question at the end, because the last thing I want to talk about is how the documentary hypothesis plays into the Book of Moses and also the Book of Mormon. And we can discuss that a little bit too at the end. So I wanted to kind of focus on the Old Testament piece first, and then we'll go to the Book of Mormon and the Book of Moses and see how those relate. So.
Okay.
Did anyone else have that? Did it challenge anyone else's faith in God or faith in other things, or give them a different perspective? Because I had a much better opinion of the Old Testament after I read the documentary hypothesis.
Yeah, same with me.
Yeah, I understood it so much better. Once you knew who was writing it and why, you start saying, oh, they weren't just off having, you'd say, how did this guy go in and sleep with his dad's concubine? What's that all about? What is this happening? And then when you realize that they're just trying to discredit the older brothers down to Judah so that Judah looked like he had the birthright, and the other side is trying to discredit the Judah and him having I think he slept with his daughter-in-law or something like that, and they're trying to discredit him. And it's really everyone just trying to discredit everybody so to keep in power and to show their power base. And it really became a political drama almost. It was really, to me, very fascinating as I read into it.
It's a real shame we don't have 12 sources instead of just 4. That would be interesting.
And I should point out that the documentary hypothesis and what we read is just one version of the documentary hypothesis. It is a hypothesis. I think it's pretty evident. Maybe someone here would disagree, but to me, it was very evident that it was not written by Moses. It was definitely written by different sources. I think all Bible scholars almost agree with that, except for the ones at BYU, that it was written by various sources. They do argue about whether J is older and E is older, whether P was written before the exile or after the exile. So there are different models out there. And, you got to be open to change and say, well, he might not be right here. He might be wrong there. I thought there were some arguments he made that were stronger than others. We struggled with he had that whole chapter on the tent of meeting, and that it was placed inside the temple, and that the temple housed the tent of the tabernacle. We weren't sure where that was going. We had that discussion last night, was what was his point with that? I don't know if anyone saw, what that was or not. But to me, probably the most fascinating story, the one that I always had the hardest time with in the Old Testament, was the golden calf story. I never could get my hands around, why would Aaron, who just, he threw his staff down, it turned into a snake and ate he's there the whole time. He's God's right, he's Moses' right-hand man. And then he's building a golden calf. And the story never made sense to me. And then he's not punished for it. Everybody else gets punished, but he gets made, his sons become the priests. And it's like, what is going on here? That didn't make sense to me. But once I read how that story came about, it really fascinated me when I started saying, wow, this is interesting that they had calves in the northern kingdom and they had cherubims in the southern kingdom to represent. And once you understood that, the story just came to life. Did anyone else, what were your thoughts on that story, on the golden calf incident?
I thought the calf was a symbol of the Canaanite god El. In one of Richard Friedman's lectures I watched, he said that the Levites were trying to transform El into Yahweh. So the golden calf had to go.
Yeah, he definitely, the bull was definitely a symbol of El, which, and it sounded like to me that Jeroboam, the northern king, was trying to offset the fact that the temple was in the southern kingdom. He had to have his version, and he kind of wanted to get the Canaanite. There was a large Canaanite population as well as an Israelite population, And to combine his people, he kind of used the symbol of El and used that to make a temple, you know, by putting them in Dan and in Bethel. He put those two as showing the throne existed across the entire kingdom. And so he didn't have a temple building, but he was trying to say, my entire kingdom is the temple. Anyone can worship anywhere in my kingdom. You don't have to go to the temple. Bruce.
Yeah, I just, pulled out a quote that I highlighted. In order to give such laws claim of authority and thus give it authority, this writer wanted to claim that this was the Torah that God gave to Moses at Mount Sinai. In short, another case of pious fraud. And he mentions that pious fraud is strong language to use about a part of the Bible, but pious softens the impact of the fraud, but only slightly. So it's people writing to kind of further their view, their power and stuff. And I see that in the modern Mormon church.
Dale, you got.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of parallels between what the writers were doing when they're putting the Bible together. I've really enjoyed looking into the documentary Hypothesis, although I wasn't able to complete this one. It got into some weeds. Even the things that Joseph Smith was doing, he was trying to pull from ancient sources, and it seems like we as people, we like to go to older sources to give legitimacy to whatever power we might have. And it seems like the different writers of the Bible were trying to legitimize the power that their side had compared to the other side. And writing these origin stories, I think, is something that lends credibility and authority and whatever. At least that's the appearance that it gives. And I had a thought just earlier that even today there are a lot of stories that we tell that we know are stories, like DC Comics or Marvel Comics. A lot of the movies and whatnot, we still like to go back and give origin stories for these individuals. I think it's part of what we do as people, as storytellers. And in some ways it turns into a political document to lend credibility and authority to whatever power we may or may not have.
I agree. And kind of going back to what Bruce said, at first he kept using that pious fraud phrase, but right towards the end of the book, he said, it wasn't really a pious fraud, because like the person who wrote Deuteronomy, he said the law code was an older code that they had, and it was almost like they had these bones that they were trying to put meat on. And I think sometimes we have to step back and look and put ourselves back in that time, because the Bible was the first history book. There was no history up till that time. So nobody really knew how to do it or what they were doing. They had oral traditions. They were trying to get them written down. They were trying to understand the world they lived in. They were fighting. They were struggling for power. And this, being from a certain family, is very ancient. In the ancient world, that was a big thing. Which family you came from, whether you were Roman or Greek. Did you come from a certain family? And that gave you certain, credibility by the fact that you came from that family. So by writing these things down and trying to justify their claims on things, that was a very human thing to do back in that time. So I think sometimes we want to say, oh, they wrote it as a complete fraud, when that may not have been the case. It's that they were, for the first time, writing things down and making books. I see Brian and Bruce. Bruce, I saw your hand up first, and Brian.
I was just going to say, this is my own kind of view of things, like if you say you're a prophet and you want to start having sex with more women, you do section 132 and say, God told me I had to have sex with all these women, and it like, if you're the priests and you're saying, this is who can be the priests, whether that's the Levites or the descendants of Aaron, and stuff, it seems like a bit of manipulation, and we can see that manipulation more in our own lives.
Yeah, how can you get better than that? God told me to do it, so
Yeah,
it's
I don't argue with that.
yeah,
at all.
God told me to have sex with this woman.
No
Yeah.
argument.
My grandpa used to always tell his daughters, when people would say that, he'd say, "Tell God to tell me that then."
Yeah, can you say that again? I didn't hear the.
My grandfather used to always tell his daughters, if somebody comes up to you and says that, because I'm actually from fundamentalists. So when someone comes up to you and says that, you just say, "Well, tell God to tell me that instead of you."
Oh, okay.
Very valid point. That's very good.
Yeah.
Did Brian have a comment? I think Brian did.
I did, but just to piggyback on what Mitchell was saying for a moment before I go into my comment, I always thought, this is a tangent, but with the story of Joseph Smith introducing polygamy and telling several women that an angel with a drawn sword commanded him to do it or he would be struck down, my thought was always like, well, if it was so important, then why couldn't the angel come to the woman too and tell her that she needed to do this? Why did it always have to be from Joseph?
But the apologists tell stories
what I
of
was
the
gonna
women
say
being
about
convinced.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right. They like to tell those stories. They don't like to tell the stories of the women that weren't convinced.
Yes, I agree.
What I was going to say, I was wondering if anyone else, as they read through this Friedman book, I kind of found myself feeling like the well was poisoned a little bit. For me, it seemed like Friedman was attached to several hypotheses that he wanted to hold on to, despite maybe more modern evidence to the contrary. I know he's also written a book on the Exodus, where he kind of holds the Exodus as a real thing, despite kind of most scholars that don't have a political or historical reason to hold to that hypothesis kind of see the Exodus as a, just as a narrative rather than as an archaeological fact. Seems to hold on to that hypothesis. He also held on to other things, and I'm certainly no expert on this area, but one thing that kind of struck me is he seemed to hold a lot of the history in the Bible as real history, like the combined kingdom of Judah and Israel. That's something that most scholars don't see as a real thing. Archaeology has looked at the city of Jerusalem at the time of King David, and it really was a small city-state at that time. There was no walls around it yet. There's really no evidence that there ever was a combined kingdom of Judah and Israel. Most scholars today see that as a narrative being developed later after Assyria conquered the northern kingdom, and that was a real historical event. And Israel came south to Judah, which was a real historical event. That narrative of a combined kingdom in the past was a narrative that was written, most scholars believe, to combine, to provide kind of a fuller, richer history to help these two kingdoms become more united and see themselves like we were once a united kingdom and kind of can be combined now. Things like that. And Friedman seems to not want to go where the archaeology suggests we should go. He kind of seems to want to hold to some of his hypotheses that there really was a combined kingdom, that there really was an exodus, even though he admits it was probably a smaller exodus, but even that is debatable. And I really liked a lot of the things he has. He had some really strong arguments, really thought-provoking. But for me, just knowing that he seems to be holding to some of these hypotheses that really probably aren't validated by more modern archaeological, like historical, that seemed to poison the well for me a little bit. Like I found myself being skeptical of some of the things he had to say just because knowing kind of his stance on some of these other things. I wondered if anyone else encountered that or felt that way at all, or if that was just me.
For me, a little bit, that was the confusion I had about the story with the tabernacle and the temple, because I felt like that was really, I guess, promoting this really strong belief. I'm trying to justify how this could all happen. And then I thought, why is this in here? Because the whole time I felt like he was trying to convince me that, none of this is how we learned it to be. And then here's a story that he's like, but I can justify how this happened. So I was a little confused by that too, or it did make me question it a little bit.
Yeah, I felt the
myself.
same way. He was pushing the, hey, I figured out that the tent's in the temple and this is how it was. And so he was kind of more pushing just his belief that he'd figured that out. Because that I felt was like the weakest point. And I do agree with you. There's a lot of different people who, and as I said, some people put different people in different orders, you know, P, where P is and different things. And I think no matter who writes a book, you're going to have some of, you know, they're going to be possessed to do a certain way or to have certain things that they believe in. He is Jewish. And that's why when I read the David Bockavoy, it was kind of interesting because he wrote it from more of a Mormon perspective. And it's funny because he kept arguing that I still believe the Book of Mormon is scripture. I believe the Doctrine and Covenants and the Pearl of Great Price are scripture, just as I believe the Old Testament scripture. And I was going, how does he believe that? How does he say that when he's left everything? And his argument was, well, it's as much scripture. The Book of Mormon is as much scripture as the Old Testament because it was written by people who wanted to try to make a spiritual, that people read for spiritual guidance. And it's none of it's really written by who they say it is, but we use it and we follow it and we believe in it. Therefore, it's scripture. And that's the angle he was taking. So he had no problem saying the church is still, that the Book of Mormon is true. He wouldn't say it was true. He would say that it's scripture. And I think that goes back to Mitchell's question, because he did come back and he started teaching. He came back, and of course, they put him to work as a seminary teacher in Grantsville, Utah, way out in the farm. The guy has a PhD and can read, you know, all these different languages, and that's where they put him. And it just became too tough over time. And now he's the minister of prisons in Utah. So the prisoners have this PhD guy way more than anybody at BYU or anything has to teach them the scriptures. So I thought what you said, Brian's exactly right. Different people see it different ways and hold on to different things. And I was the same way. I kind of said, this one I think is a little weaker than this argument. Like I thought the Ezra argument was pretty strong, that Ezra was the redactor. You know, it showed up with him. That's the first place it showed up. You know, there was no Torah, and then all of a sudden Ezra comes. He's known as the lawgiver. I said, that makes sense. I mean, if it's not Ezra, I don't think we'd ever be able to put a name to it because it had to have been someone exiled that we don't know about. But some of those things were strong, but I thought the point was very strong that, you know, when certain authors always used you know, they only used tent of the meeting was only used by one writer. Temple was never mentioned by one writer, but it was mentioned by the J or the P writer. The different styles became so apparent. There was no way that was coincidence. You know, it was clear that clearly there's multiple authorships. And that to me was the most important thing of the documentary hypothesis was it's definitely multiple authors. Whether we know exactly who those authors are or not, didn't become that important to me. As the fact that there's different authorships. That's what became important to me.
Yeah, I just kind of, as I was reading it, I was thinking, okay, the first book we went over was Free Will by Sam Harris. The kind of the basic thing that I took away from it is that our concept of free will, as we were taught growing up, isn't exactly, you know, where we're completely in control of everything that we choose to do. And then the second book, Sapiens, where the narrative of how the world works, that we're, you know, you have to believe that the world is about 6,000 years old. You have to believe the flood. As Mormons, you have to believe the literal Tower of Babel because of the Jaredites and stuff like that. And this kind of just adds another kind of little piece saying, okay, the Old Testament isn't quite what we were taught to believe. And so, you know, I'm just seeing these three books as going like, okay, what I was taught to believe growing up doesn't quite seem to be accurate. Still trying to figure out what is accurate, but
Right.
The narrative doesn't seem to be very accurate.
Are you saying that our book club is sort of a nail in the coffin, book after book after book? Who knows where we'll end up at the end, right? No, I had that same observation though, Bruce. I think you're absolutely right.
I think our book list, because it was a compendium of people's suggestions, and coming from the Mormon, progressive Mormon, ex-Mormon communities, kind of led us to some of these books because, the example, documentary hypothesis was discouraged to be studied by BYU scholars, and a different explanation of free will, it goes against Mormon beliefs. Evolution goes against Mormon beliefs. So this is kind of where this third book, I'm just going like, yeah, at least what I believe I was taught doesn't seem to me to be accurate.
I think it's changed the lens in which I see the world. I grew up and my lens was God. God says this. Okay, this confuses me, but it's God. So I follow God. And now I don't know what my lens is, but this book kind of told me that the lens is self-interest, motivation, looking at what people are saying and looking for the motivation and how it helps them. It's kind of cynical, but the author didn't feel cynical, but it might be a little more accurate. Look at us, we're losing our innocence. I don't know what else to say.
Very well said. Very well said. I felt the very same way. Very good.
Mm-hmm.
I actually found this book to be liberating because a year before I read it, we were down at Arches National Park and they were going into great detail as to how these arches formed over millions of years. And I subconsciously rejected that because I wasn't allowed to, So when I read this and saw where the Bible actually came from, I was like, oh, that's like, I can believe what I want now. But one thing I did notice, and this is because I actually read Richard Friedman's other book called The Bible with Sources Revealed, where he just goes through the whole first 5 books of Moses with a highlighter and highlights who wrote what. And in process of reading this book, it seems that the pre-source really just wanted to stress the idea of absolute obedience. There's the story of Moses hitting the rock from the water and the Lord chastises him because he didn't do it exactly as the Lord commanded or something like that. It seems to me that the Bible was a better book until a P-source got involved. And that's the best thing that it liberated me from was this priestly source.
That's probably a good
Nice.
question. What is the church today more a D, a J, an E, or a P?
Oh,
You know the answer to that.
Dallin Oaks going on about taking the sacrament with your right hand.
Yeah.
That's a very P thing to
The
say.
whole white shirt thing, when you show pictures, like when I was in high school in the 70s, I wore, shiny Saturday Night Fever shirts with suits and stuff, with loud ties. And, it was
Do you
so.
have any pictures, Bruce? Do you have any pictures?
I
Next time.
I do, and they're quite embarrassing.
We want to
Hey,
see him.
We want to see.
It's
Hey,
like,
Bruce, can you pull up that picture I sent you that shows what percentage of the Pentateuch is priestly versus
okay,
EY? It's kind of an interesting
the colored one.
graphic. Yeah,
Like-
yeah.
Okay, second. Here we go.
This breaks it up by chapters, kind of, and you can see that the blue is what the books and the sections that were written by the P. The J is in the red, the E is in the green. There is a little purple there, which is a mixture, I think, of because several chapters, if you cut them up, they're a mix of them. But you can see that E really didn't play much of a role in Genesis, just later in Genesis, and then through Exodus, and then they kind of almost stopped. And J was almost all Genesis, and then didn't show up hardly at all in Exodus, and not at all Leviticus, and rarely in Numbers too. So I just thought this was kind of an interesting visual anyway to see, how it was broken up. And the priestly is by far the most used source. And I would agree with you that P is probably, as far as obedience in the church, that has a heavy influence on today's church. But I think our view of God very much follows more E and J, as in being a human God that we interface with, and not so much a strict God like he was in P, and that we could actually, talk to God, whereas P said, no, you have to go through the priest to do it. So I think all the authors, the different ways kind of gave you, I think the church is kind of incorporated as not just our church, I think all Christianity is kind of incorporated both of those, the different pieces, and made something that the people who originally wrote these things probably wouldn't even recognize, if they saw it today. That's not the God I believe in. That's a completely different God than what we believe in. So you can go ahead and kill that then, Bruce.
I had a comment on that. I think I made the same observation that our God seems to be more E and J, human, merciful. And then we belonged to, or still belong to, an organization, a church, which seems to be more P, rules for almost no reason. Like you said, white shirts. And I mean, we could go on and on about the strange rules that you find yourself following. And I think eventually that leads a lot of us to the point where we say, what do these rules, P, have to do with God or our relationship with a Jesus or a savior or a God at all, which you learn about and you're taught about in the organization with the P rules. You're still taught about the J-E God. So at least for me, and I think other people, you arrive at that. Why do I have to follow these P rules to have a relationship with a God or a deity? And that causes a little bit of discord and perhaps leads you in a direction, I think. I mean, I've heard people say that. Why? What's the point? What does taking the sacrament with my right hand have anything to do with me feeling that I have a savior or or coffee? Yeah. Of course, now I've taken it a step further. Like the quiz the other day, I said, mentioned, I was talking to Melinda and Landon last night and said, had I taken, it was a quiz. I posted it on Reddit about what are your religious beliefs? And I thought, had I taken this first of all, prior to reading Sapiens, I would have had a different score. This is why I joke about nail in the coffin. Had I taken that quiz prior to who wrote the Bible, I don't think I would have gotten 85% atheist like I do. But I mean, these are definitely opening my mind to all of these different things. But back to my original comment, I think has anyone else felt that juxtaposition of the rules of P in the church? Yeah, and standing in the way, what do they even have to do with getting to know a God, if that's what your goal is, to feel connected to a deity? So that was just one of my observations.
I think Mitchell had Mitchell.
Yeah, well, one thing, because I'm reading the Old Testament this year for our church, and I noticed in the end of Exodus, then God says, if you keep these commandments, you'll be safe from the plagues. And in P, there's a strong focus on cleanliness. And I kind of think, the year 2020 made me think about this, but I think there might have been some sort of a plague back then that the Levites were protected from because they were obsessed with cleanliness. And so they interpreted that as, oh, God must favor us because he didn't kill us like he did these other guys.
Does that have something to do with COVID?
if you read Leviticus, there's a strong emphasis on just cleanliness.
Cleanliness, yeah. The priests have to be clean. Yeah, there definitely is.
Well, it brings up the concept, and I've seen it on Reddit several times, the word of wisdom. If the word of wisdom really wanted to be a health code, it would have just said, wash your hands. Because at the time it came out, surgeons were dealing with dead bodies and then going and delivering babies without washing their hands. And the mothers and the babies died. Nobody had the concept of like germs and stuff like that. If the word of wisdom was something that God wanted to really help the health of the people, he might have just said, wash your hands. So that's,
and boil your water.
Boil water.
Yeah, boil the water. Yep. Well, I think Mitchell had a good point there. And Brian had mentioned it before earlier too. He did write a book. The same author wrote the book Exodus, and he makes the argument that the group that really was the Exodus group was the Levites who left Egypt and then probably came. That's why they had no territory to begin with, and then they were made the priests and given the priests and the priesthood, and that's kind of how they combined in with them. And so I read Exodus as well. I didn't think it was nearly as well written, I guess, as who wrote the Bible, but it did. I've heard the same thing as you, Brian. There's really no archaeological evidence and I guess it's hard to argue against a small group believing, because it's almost impossible to prove that from so many thousands of years ago. But you're right. He takes from the argument that an Exodus did happen, whereas many scholars say no, there was no
Right.
Exodus. There's no archaeological evidence of any influx of new peoples at the time that they were supposed to have come in.
His argument for the Exodus really reminded me of what Mormon apologists do for the Book of Mormon. When they want to maintain some historicity, they now argue for a small group of Lehites that went into Central America and just mixed in with the native population that was already there. It's almost essentially what Friedman's doing. He wants to maintain some sort of Exodus. And yeah, you can't prove that. But as far as the narrative of a big Exodus that had any sort of cultural influence, there's very little evidence of that, and a lot of evidence against that. Most scholars today think that the Israelites just kind of naturally evolved from the existing Canaanites as they migrated from nomadic society to forming city-states and cities and highlands, and they started to form cities, and that became the Israelites. They grew out of the Canaanites, and then they developed their cultural and religious traditions grew out of that as they settled in from the nomadic society they were before. So.
But I think the fact that somebody who wants to believe in the Exodus has to make it go down to such a small group says a lot about the Exodus and whether what we read is really
Well, exactly.
happened.
And for Friedman being Jewish, that's important to him. That's an important part of their religious culture, is that the Exodus story is a important identifying characteristic for the people. Me, I have no attachment to maintain that narrative, and so I'm perfectly okay with accepting whatever the archaeological studies say. Like, if they said there's good evidence for an Exodus, okay, I have no problem accepting that. If they say that there's really not evidence for any sort of Exodus, then I can accept that too, because I don't have a personal motivating reason to try to accept it one way or the other.
What was your take on the Mushites and possible descendants of Moses? And Moses may not have really been, there's question whether Moses was a real person or not. Was there some guy Moses kind of, this could be in the tradition of Rome, Romulus and Remulus. Was there really any people, was there a guy that name? Yeah, they probably didn't suckle a she-wolf, but did somebody exist? What was your take on the Mushite priest? I thought it was a very interesting
Yeah,
take.
I actually thought he had pretty good for that line of thought, but I also had the thought that there didn't need to be a real Moses person for that line to develop. There just needed to be a group of people that, as part of their cultural tradition, associate themselves as being descended from Moses. Even if Moses wasn't a real person, that tradition could exist, and that group of people could have been a real people that followed their lineage and traced that back to Moses, even if Moses, as a literal character, was not a real person. So
I think that's the thing that surprised me the most was Moses is the great lawgiver. Everybody knows Moses. And then you all of a sudden hear that there's this one group that everything they say is to kind of disparaging Moses. They had to say a few good things about him, but here's the Israelites disparaging Moses. And when I started reading that, I went, yeah, he's got a point. There's a group here that doesn't like Moses.
yeah, or at least lift up Aaron a little bit.
Yeah.
The Aaron line could be a little bit more prominent. So,
Did anyone else have a thought on that?
Bruce had a question.
Yeah, I just had a thought is whether Moses existed or not, it's like the European royal families, tracing their lineage back to biblical figures, therefore back to Adam. And you have Mormons who do their genealogy and they just will, drop, oh yeah, we've traced our genealogy back to Adam. And you're just going like, yeah, that's not exactly, accurate. I don't believe the church or the church's genealogists buy into that, but it's a narrative that gives them legitimacy. And so, you listen to Mormon stories and every person, gives their kind of lineage back to Joseph Smith's time, and stuff. My personal lineage is my my great grandparents or great grandparents were, nobody pioneers from Denmark, and they were stuck off in some podunk town in southern Colorado, and no one was ever famous and no one ever knew anybody famous. But to give yourself legitimacy, you've got to say, I'm descendant of Moses, I'm descendant of Aaron. This gives me the authority to tell you what to do. And that's just,
I have one of those charts that shows that lineage going back to Adam, and there's a lot of gaps in it. There's a lot of holes.
Mine goes all the way. Mine goes back to Adam and Eve. This is I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah.
This was on the.
You even got pictures of Adam and Eve in there.
I know, and just above them is Heavenly Father.
Yeah.
I also.
oh, go
I
ahead.
also took my lineage back to, let's see, there were a couple other gods that were in my lineage, like a primordial god. Let's see, Chaos Titan. Yeah.
Well,
Wow, you're.
I go
You're
back to
important.
things.
Does. I'm just hoping to
there's-
find out I'm part Neanderthal. That's what I really, if I go over, I would like that. Now, I have a question to throw out. I've been thinking about the lost 12 tribes or the 10 tribes, right? That's something really important in the LDS world. Like my son
right now.
recently came home from a mission, and that's all they talk about is the gathering of Israel, the tribes. It's such a big deal. So from my reading, I started to understand that doesn't even exist. They're really, can anybody expound a little on that? Because listen to conference, gathering of Israel, it's very important for the LDS narrative that be a real thing. Did anybody else have any thoughts or maybe read it more clearly than I did that can talk about that? Because my missionary son constantly, 10 tribes, gathering. I'd love to be able to gently debunk him, maybe a little.
Mitchell, looks like Mitchell and Austin both.
If
Mitchell,
they're a believer in the
Yeah, I'd
church,
love to hear about anyone's take on that.
if they're a believer in the church, Joseph Smith did clearly teach that the Israelites gathered into the North countries, which is interpreted to be England and Scandinavia and stuff. At least that's the way I was taught. That's where the early Mormons went.
Huh.
Neanderthals.
I know he's been taught that it was a literal gathering too, that we're literal descendants of a certain tribe. But I was always confused about patriarchal blessings where it can be the tribe of Ephraim and my parents are a different tribe or something. So.
Right. But Landon, what is it? Doesn't it say, I thought I read that there really were no tribes. Like that were lost.
Well, I think there were tribes, but one of the things I saw was a lot of the tribes ceased to exist prior to the Assyrian,
Right.
scattering. So it's like, well, if those tribes didn't exist at that time, how do they exist now? They couldn't have really been scattered. I don't think it was all of them, but there were several small tribes that had seemed to disappear by the time, the way I was reading it.
I thought I was taught, well, of course, my dad told me they were under the ice, at one of the poles.
I've heard that one too. Yeah.
Very distinctly taught that they would actually rise up from the ice, and come out. And then later, I think the church developed more of a figurative, it's a gathering. It's not necessarily a bunch of people are going to come back. But yeah, I was fascinated in who wrote the Bible to see that what I'd always believed, that these people, a mass exodus to the ice, I guess, disappeared. That's not really true, but it's an important narrative to the church. Although maybe
I've heard what Mitchell said, that they went to England in that area. But then why, when you get a patriarchal blessing, when most of the members can trace back to England and stuff, are you Ephraim and not one of the lost 10 tribes? That's, that never made sense to me.
I was told.
Got a tribe.
Yeah,
They haven't been assigned a tribe through their patriarchal blessing. Go figure that one out.
boy.
I was told
Find
that.
your own.
Write-in. It's a write-in
A
candidate.
Right in. Mitchell,
I
did
was told
Spencer?
that all of the northern tribes are considered the tribe of Ephraim.
Oops.
Didn't hear you.
Sorry, I was told that all of the northern tribes are considered to be the tribe of Ephraim, just as all the southern tribes are called Judah, and that's so.
Oh, got you, because Ephraim, yeah, they, okay, I can kind of see that. Yeah, Judah was Benjamin too. Dale?
Yeah, I think the early church was really focused on lineage and blood and a lot of things like that. And that narrative that that your blood had something to do with your righteousness was something that was passed down through my family. I've got a family history book that's titled Born of Believing Blood. And the people who put this together were totally on board with the idea that your ancestors had this blood in them that led them to believe more in the gospel, in Christ, and in Joseph Smith even. You have this idea that was passed on through my family. My ancestors go back, I'm 8th generation, whatever, 5 generations back. In my family, 100% are Mormons. And it's just some of these ideas perpetuated through my family lines.
Yeah, I have one of those too. It's called Upon This Rock. What we taught was that Joseph Smith taught that the way to recognize the house of Israel is the ones who would accept the missionaries into their house, because they were going out without purse or script. And so those who accepted the missionaries and took care of them were the blood of Israel. As to how that works when two brothers, one will accept them and the other one doesn't, I guess it's like a recessive gene or something.
I'm from Meridian, Idaho, super conservative. And from that area, we've had some mission presidents assigned to Russia. And they come back with stories of the patriarchs giving patriarchal blessings and assigning them to all different tribes. And so we get real excited about the gathering happening.
Okay, I've just got something I'm going to show on the screen. In my quest to figure out how the world works, I did my DNA by 4 different companies. And so according to 23andMe, L at the very top is mitochondrial Eve, and she lived 180,000 years ago. And so that little from L to L3, N to R to H, and then that over into Europe is, my descent from Eve. And Adam, I think, lived like 250,000 years ago.
Yeah, not at the same time. Yep.
They never met.
Yeah.
Oh.
Spencer, did you have your hand up? I thought I saw your hand go up.
It wasn't up, sorry.
Oh, so, okay.
If they never met, how was Eve able to obey him?
I think that may be something new, because I don't know, in my family, I'm not sure my mom was ever obeying my father anyway. So
that's actually kind of where I wanted to go, was the creation story, because I think that's the first, when you go the creation story, to me, that was what broke the back, because to me, the whole reason we have the New Testament and Jesus Christ was because of the fall. So when I started looking at that in the Old Testament, I said, well, to know of Jesus or Jesus's role, I really need to know, did Adam and Eve really exist? And so as I read this story, I started saying, well, there's clearly 2 different stories here of Adam and Eve. They're told differently, they're in different orders. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're wrong, but it certainly got me questioning that. And then as I started doing kind of the research that Bruce just showed with the DNA and stuff, I started saying, well, they clearly did not live 6,000 years ago, and they didn't, that the DNA shows they weren't at the same time and at the same place. And so that one really became to me, that's why I say it really is a foundational question. The Old Testament really goes to the foundation, because the whole reason for the gospel is to overcome the fall. So as I read through the creation stories, I thought it was really cool to see the different views of the creation. One, a very cosmic, there was no water, the sky. You used to believe that water was above us in the sky, and that's why it was blue. That's what the P author thought. And then it crushed through, and the flood was actually the water draining from this protective bubble above us. It was a very cosmic view of the flood, and yet when you look at the J source, God's right there with him. He's walking in the garden with them. He's very much a part of it. It's a rain. It's not an opening of the skies. Did anyone else have any views on the flood story or the creation story?
Yeah, Landon,
Go ahead, Brian.
Landon, also that protective bubble protected people from the UV light. So that's why those ancient prophets could live to 900 years. And then after the flood, the lifespan became much closer to what it is today. So that's a fact.
They taught that to me.
It was their blood that changed.
I learned that too. Absolutely.
You know what's interesting, just on that same thing about the, if you look at Sumerian legends, Sumerian writings, early writings of their kings also lived hundreds and hundreds, centuries long, 3, 4, 5, sometimes 700, 800, 900 years, which is interesting that there's so many Sumerian influences on the Bible. That'd be a whole nother topic, but one of those influences is the lengths of people's lives in the early Old Testament. Sumerian influence, their same traditions.
The story of Noah is straight up plagiarized from Sumeria.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Gilgamesh, and if you read that, you very much see the parallels. It sends out the doves, and yeah, it's very similar.
Mitchell had his hand up.
Well, I was going to say there was actually a Sumerian king that I read about whose story is almost exactly like Noah's, where the Tigris and the Euphrates overflooded.
Yeah.
He just happened to have a boat.
Dale, did you have?
Yeah, the story of the flood and the Tower of Babel were critical junctures in my faith journey. So I was struggling with some other things, but then I dug into these stories in the Book of Mormon and trying to understand how they were incorporated into the Book of Mormon, and if what is the narrative of the Book of Mormon reliant on these two stories? That are they in the Book of Mormon? Are they taught as facts, or is more of a story? And as I was digging into the narrative of the Book of Mormon, and even in the Doctrine and Covenants and Pearl of Great Price, these stories were told as a very literal thing that happened in history, very historical. In fact, the story of the Jaredites, the brother of Jared and all of them, relies on the narrative of the Tower of Babel and the confounding of languages and whatnot. So the story that was taught as a very literal thing in the Book of Mormon, something that is shown to be not actual history, and that was I would say the nuking of my shelf.
Josh, did your hand go up?
Yeah, I was going to say just those issues, the historical issues, I guess, were more of an effect on my faith than necessarily the documentary hypothesis specifically, because whenever I would read about like what's going on in this field of like biblical criticism nowadays, it was always kind of like, yeah, the documentary hypothesis was really big like up until 40 years ago, but then it kind of fell apart and people don't really take it as seriously nowadays. But the important things were things like, well, just the idea that the Bible was not, like the books of Moses were not literally written by Moses. Like how does it have an account of his death or whatever happened to him if he wrote it,
Yeah.
Or the influences of like Gilgamesh or these Sumerian or other ancient Near Eastern influences on the Bible. I mean, that I agree. It was a huge thing of like, once you see the parallels between the Noah story and Gilgamesh, then the question is not like, suddenly your task is so much harder. Instead of just having faith in something that maybe happened, you just like have this leap of faith, like, okay, I'll just believe that there was a Noah and that this thing happened or whatever. instead it's like, no, we actually know that basically the same story came from these Sumerian epics. Now we have to explain, like, why is it also in the Bible and why is it different? And is there some magical thing that's somehow different and better about Noah? Like somehow that's actually true, where Gilgamesh is just an imaginary thing. Like that just becomes impossible. Or learning about like, I studied linguistics at BYU. That was my bachelor's degree. And so we would learn about like the Tower of Babel and just like how impossible it, like how that incompatible that idea of the like fragmenting of the languages was with the actual development of language. And then
They actually taught that in BYU.
I was just going to ask that. They actually taught that.
So no, I mean, it wasn't like an explicit part of the curriculum. Because I mean, I don't know, that just isn't part of linguistics really.
Yeah,
but it was like
pretty big wrench
adjacent. So in my historical linguistics class, I remember somebody doing a presentation on like the linguistics of the tribes of Israel, taking it all very literally. And it was just like clearly bogus. Like, I don't know. Anyway, but just seeing that stuff show up in the Book of Mormon too, that absolutely nail in the coffin. It's like the Tower of Babel in the Book of Mormon. Okay, that's hard to get over that.
Game over. Game over.
Bruce?
Yeah, I found this, highlighted this quote. Since the exiled community was hardly likely to believe that the Babylonians were stronger than Yahweh, the answer that was regularly suggested to them was it was their own fault. Then further down, one of the logical consequences of monotheism is guilt. And, isn't that kind of one of the central themes of our Mormonism today? It's your fault, you're broken, we have the fix, you do what we say, you pay us money. But like with was it Bednar saying you have to have enough faith to not be healed by priesthood blessings? I mean, it's the same thing that it seems like the different writers of the first 5 books of the Bible were each trying to kind of manipulate things into the way they thought things should happen. And it seems to me that the modern Mormon church is doing the same thing. And one of the things that it has to do is convince you that you're broken and that they have the fix. And they're the only people that have the fix. What really kind of made me feel a lot better about life in general, being an old gay guy. I'm not broken, I've made a lot of bad choices in my life. I should have gotten out, years before I did get out. But, that whole concept, you're broken. And I think you see that one of the logical consequences of monotheism is guilt. So it's kind of part of a manipulative structure. At least that's my view of it.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I guess you could say the gospel of Christ, or everybody is good enough and his grace is sufficient for all, kind of throws a pretty big wrench into that. But the church really does focus on I'm not good enough, there's always something else I can do. And yeah, there's a lot of guilt.
It threw a big wrench in the Jews at the time. That's why they were so keen on getting rid of Jesus.
Yeah.
What I think is interesting, hi, I'm Tom. I think is interesting is that I always think of it this way now. A lot of the things that were taught to us as kids and children, and I'm 55, so a lot of those people who taught that stuff, they're all dead. And they taught it on to some of the people that are existing right now, but it's like, when were we ever going to be allowed to think, to grow, to evolve? And what I see here is we're questioning now the messengers. We're questioning the writers. We're questioning where all this came from, which was not what we did when we were 20 going on missions, or 8 years old when we were baptized. And the church is not geared for that because they've been living in an antiquated world taught by other people who are dead now.
Yeah.
And they haven't been allowed to evolve. So there's this massive amount of being stuck where some of us are just going like this around it, going, I feel like the concept of just firing my God is what I have to do to move on and go, where is the God that I do want, where I'm still wanting to have a God. And I know I'm not addressing the book right now, but I think it's just, as I listen to these conversations, I'm coming away with these thoughts about we're doing this, and why have we not been able or enabled to do this in a probably safe way in terms of the church, that we could do this so that, you don't have the shaming or the guilt, Bruce, or whatever, that we're naturally able to be naturally who we are rather than being
Well, the
forced out.
natural man is an enemy to God.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay, and with that, I'll have another.
Have another. I think did Brian? Did you you had your hand up? Yes.
What Bruce was saying, kind of relating back to the book, we talked about the peace source, and the peace source. One of its central themes was centralizing power in Jerusalem, and all sacrifices had to be done at Jerusalem at the temple. And what Bruce was saying, that really reminds me of kind of the Mormon church. Like, everything has to be done through the Mormon church. The church has the authority. You have to be baptized through the church. You have to get the priesthood through the church. You have to go to the temple through the church. And I'm currently identified as atheist, but for those who don't, for those who still want to have a relationship with the divine or with Jesus Christ, like, that mentality that has to be done through the church, I think really hinders people's ability to have their own personal relationship with the divine, to have that personal relationship with their Savior, because everything has to be done through the church, and the church has the authority. And I found this picture too I wanted to share because I think it relates.
I think I have to allow.
Okay, this will just be real quick.
You're allowed to screen share now.
Okay, so this is a picture I found from the April 1972 priesthood conference session. Is at the top, and you can see all the colored shirts. And as the church has become more,
not seen it yet.
Oh, you guys aren't seeing it?
No.
Darn. Wait.
Did you
Here we
highlight?
go. Now I can.
You have to allow.
Yeah, I've allowed it.
You've allowed it.
And then share screen.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, I don't know why it won't let me. Sorry.
Dang it. Can you
can email it to Bruce, and Bruce can
email it
post
to
it.
Bruce and he can put it up?
Attach it in the chat.
Or attach it to the chat. Would that work? Or maybe not?
Or instant messenger it.
Yeah, I'll send you my email address. Let's see.
We love graphics.
It's a cool.
No, I want to see it. Let's get it
No,
up.
the graphics are helpful. I found, being able to see some of this.
Okay, Brian, I just direct messaged you my email address.
Okay.
If you
Here,
can-
I'll email it to you here.
While you send that, Dell had a comment. Let's go to Dell, and then we'll come back to Brian when it gets there.
While you're talking about that, I just wanted to say the church does really well if we're I don't know if everyone's looked into Fowler's Stages of Faith. You've probably heard of Fowler's Stages of Faith. The church does really well with stage 3. That's where you understand your universe. All your questions are answered. The church has an answer to every question, and you're comfortable with where you are. And I think, Tom, what you're talking about is moving from that stage 3 to stage 4. And the church is not good at all at, first of all, understanding the stage 4, helping members who are in stage 3 understand stage 4, or leaders understand stage 4, or even stuff after that. They want to hold on to this like they're in the P. They want to really hold on to this narrative that is absolutely true, that works well for the people in the stage 3. I think that the absolute narrative, the black and white narrative works really well for the people who are in the stage 3 faith, but once you transition to the stage 4, it doesn't work.
And oh, here we go. Is this it? Oh, look at
Oh, yeah.
that. Look at that.
Look at how we've become more P over the years. All those colored shirts at priesthood session, and now today, it's all white.
We're a little whitewashed, aren't we?
I was in the
I love that.
I was in,
Picture's worth 1,000 words, isn't it?
I'm the dudes in the 70s, man. I'm digging those shirts.
That.
And those white
I won't
ties.
let him wear a white shirt.
Nope.
I will not let him wear a white. Before, I was more out before he was, and I would not let him wear white shirts to church. I said, you have to do this. You look horrible in white. You just can't. Well, I was trying to understand, and I had a son sent home from passing the sacrament to go change a shirt. And it was one of my very first, just come on, guys, this is not important. So that, I love that.
They're chasing us out over white shirts.
We had our bishop told my son when we were going through the 12-year, the deacon interview, I was not wearing a white shirt, and he brought that up specifically. I want you to be wearing a white shirt to my son, and I'm sitting there with a colored shirt next to him.
Vilified right there as the dad. You're not a good dad because your shirt happens to be a color. Yeah.
I'm less faithful. I'm a sinner.
We now know what to call it. It's P all the way. So
JJ.
I love that graphic. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah,
That
appreciate it, Brian.
really says it.
JJ.
That's excellent.
Can't hear any audio.
While he's fixing that, I wore a light colored shirt, 1976 conference. I was in the overflow in the Salt Palace right before my mission, as Boyd K. Packer gave the little factory speech. And I hadn't gone through the temple yet.
There for the little factory speech.
My day was going so
The
well.
whole back of my shirt was drenched in sweat. Because that was, the issue of my life.
But wait, you were there for the little factory talk?
I was in the overflow of the priesthood meeting in the Salt Palace. The priesthood meeting was in the tabernacle, but there were so many people there because my parents used to go all the time. And this was right before my mission. And my sister was very sick. So my mother was in Utah taking care of her. So I was there, and that I can remember it was a tan striped shirt. And I hadn't gone to the temple yet, so I didn't have a t-shirt on under it. And I could just feel the sweat rolling down my back for the little factory speech. So JJ.
That's a claim to fame to hear that in real time.
Why don't we pull that talk up now and watch it?
Oh, no, we can't. We
said it.
Oh dear.
Type it in the chat and I'll read it if you want.
No, again, he's dead. Okay.
He's dead. That's
dead.
it.
I think JJ has something.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're trying to get his audio. Yeah.
We can't hear him.
Dang it.
You can sign language it.
Chat the question or chat the comment.
Yeah,
While he's trying to get up there, hey, Camille, you joined a little late, but we're also glad that it went so well for you with your family last time.
Thank you.
Great
Bring us
news.
up to date on that.
Huh?
Bring us up to date.
Oh, well, yeah, we told them over the phone and they were really loving about it. I mean, they were sad and they all told me, oh, we're so devastated and we're sad for you, but they're like, we love you and we'll support you. And so they were great. They were great about it. And we just kind of don't talk about it anymore. It's just kind of
That's the standard, yep.
That's my experience too.
They're still
We just
talking
don't
to
talk.
you.
Camille, can I just say this in my experience working around a lot of faith crisis folks and groups that I attend, that I find that it's really important, as much space as that you are asking for from your family, once you do kind of come out in that kind of way, that you allow them to have the space, and you'll probably find over time, they're going to find out that it's really okay versus what they may have been taught with antiquated learnings and teachings
People that are dead.
that are people that are dead, that it's really going to be okay. There'll be the knee jerk, and maybe you've seen some of that, but they're now just going from stage 3 going to stage 4. But it's really scary as that development occurs, because that's also part of their involvement. Their journey now is to engage folks that don't completely believe the way that they do, and across the whole church. It's like, now what? That's a huge conversation that needs to be going on, rather than always shutting it down, because we're preventing ourselves from expanding and growing. So I wish you well in that.
That's good news.
Thank you.
Did we get JJ back?
He's back.
Still not talking. Okay, can't hear you. Spencer, looked like.
Yeah, I guess what some people were talking about earlier, it just made me think about, from the societal level, where is this all going? Because before, when you moved from stage 3 to stage 4, I think that there was an unwritten rule that if you're in stage 4, you don't tell the people in stage 3, right? And I think that the church is still operating in that sphere, but it's impossible now, right? And so the documentary hypothesis, that all of the things that are, the further back we go in time, perplexingly, we actually know more and more now about that stuff, and it's just can't be hidden anymore. And so I'm wondering what other people think, and I know that this is all just conjecture, I guess, but what other people think about where religion is moving, both the Mormon church and just religion in general, about these literal beliefs that have been so tied to these pieces of literature that are very clearly myth-based. And yeah, I'm not really sure where it's all going, and I'm not sure how people can fit in a nuanced perspective without a church pushing for it in a way that is like, that's the forefront of the belief system all of a sudden, right? So how does the church move to all of a sudden have that be the main core beliefs is not literal anymore? And it's also, you can't really create new religions the way that maybe they used to be created over time, because everything's open now. So
that's an awesome question. I think Dale raised his hand, and then Mitchell next, and then anybody else.
Yeah, I think religion thrives in the unknown, and there are some things that we know better now than we didn't in the past, like evolution, for instance, or the earth, the state of the earth, whether it's flat or round. And I think the more that we understand through science and our experiences, it's the amazing shrinking doctrine of not only our church, but of all religion. And my guess is there's always going to be at least enough unknown that religion will still be able to be viable for a large portion of who it is we are, of people. And there will always be other things that people will believe in. They'll latch on to comics or political party as what it is they believe in.
The alternative to that, because I'm seeing this even in parts of my own family and my own church, is where everything's moving in a more conspiracy direction. My uncle said, in all seriousness, that the scholars at Smithsonian know the Book of Mormon is true, but they're being paid by the evil conspiring men to say that it's not. And he's reaching out to a lot of people with this. And then the alternative to that would just be to focus more on the way you should live your life in terms of just the teachings behind it, I should say.
JJ, unmute yourself.
How about now?
Yeah.
Yep.
All righty. Wow.
Welcome to the party. Welcome to the party.
And then there was sound.
Cool. My comment was just a few comments ago. I was just
Fine. Make it. We're waiting.
I was looking at the white shirts. When I was a missionary, I got really tired of the white shirt. The only thing that made you different or unique was your tie, and we got a little crazy with our ties until our mission president kind of told us to tone it down. But when I got home, I mean, since my mission, I don't think I have ever owned a white shirt. I would never voluntarily do that. And I was the guy that went in with maybe stripes or off-white or gray or So yeah, it's I don't know why they would voluntarily do that. No one's forcing you to do that. There's no standard, no rule. I can understand for the missionaries, but nothing says you have to wear a white shirt, but they do it.
Okay, JJ, this was part of our earlier conversation about the lost 10 tribes and stuff that happened in the Middle East. I don't know if everybody knows, JJ's from Kuwait and he's Armenian. So what's your patriarchal blessing? What's your tribe?
I am an Ephraimite because I'm a little too white looking and very, grew up and raised in a church, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, that was a surprise to a lot of people that I was Ephraim. Now, if I had my patriarchal blessing in the 70s, it probably would have come out a little weird. I think there was a Mormon Stories episode on that where some people did not get a lineage and other people, I've met a couple of Gads, I've met a couple of other stuff, but they got their patriarchal blessing. I got mine in the early 90s, and these were people that got it in the 70s and 80s, and that's why it was different. It seems like since the 90s, everyone's been an Ephraimite. It's, not even Manasseh, it's Ephraim. It's that'd be a good data project for me to work on, but people are
gotta
not
keep that blood pure.
Yeah, no, we were talking about that before you came on, and I kept thinking, oh, I wish JJ would log in because I'd love to ask him what tribe he's from, having grown up in the Middle East from a Middle Eastern family.
Yeah, my patriarchal blessing reads very much like a Mormon patriarchal blessing. In fact, at one point I wrote a program that would spit out a generic patriarchal blessing for people. It gave a little bit of variety and everything. And I was trying to streamline it where it would give the same person the same one. It did get pretty close, but I'd have to dig it up somewhere, maybe just rewrite it again or something. I thought about putting it on Reddit, but people would get pissed off or that kind of thing. But these days I don't care that much, but maybe I should do it.
Well, I mean, that's, the lost 10 tribes and stuff like that, was the topic of this book,
Yes.
Well, I want to move to, because we're about hour and a half in, and I want to make sure that we talked about the last issue, and then we'll turn it over to Dale, who's going to give us an overview of the next book. I promised Mitchell I'd hit this. So the last thing I had was kind of a discussion on how does the documentary hypothesis play into the Book of Mormon and also into the Book of Moses. And, I guess I'll start with the Book of Mormon. Lehi left Jerusalem right at the time that the Jeremiah, who he says was the Deuteronomistic historian, or who he pinpoints, but whether it's him or Baruch, or I guess Baruch is who he kind of said was it. But so what Lehi supposedly left right during this time frame. So you might ask yourself, okay, what documents did he have access to at the time? He would have had, according to the charts, he would have had J, he would have had E, he would have had P. D wasn't put together because remember the second part of D wasn't until after the scattering. And so he took this with him. And I'm just throwing this out as a question. It's just, I don't have any answers, but when he left, he's identified as from the tribe of, what tribe is he from? Ephraim? Manasseh, which would have made him a northern. He would have been from the northern. So he would have been one of these his family would have been one of the northern ones that went south when the Assyrians came in. But he was not a Levite, so he could not have offered sacrifices. And we are at a point where the centralization of power at the temple was important. And I kind of wonder why, when they went back to get the plates or to get the, plates of Laban, the brass plates, why they came back with, what's the guy's name they came back with that they kidnapped? Zoram, yeah. Why didn't they come back with a Levite who could then do the sacrifices? Because I don't see how Lehi could have done sacrifices. I don't see how they could have built a temple when there was a theory of centralization at this time. And he's from a northern kingdom. And so do we see any northern things? We've got the northern E and D were kind of northern. Jeremiah was a northern Shiloh priest. where would Lehi have fit into this at that time? Because he would have been a northerner. He would have been much like Jeremiah, probably, in that he should be very much on the Shiloh side of things, and not just wondering if anyone has any thoughts on that.
I just have a quick one. What sin do you have in your life that you're questioning this stuff?
I don't know. I think of these things at night, you know.
Well, they're nightmares, more like nightmares. There you go.
Well,
ahead,
sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Isn't there a central problem here in that it's something I'd heard of, but I'd never seen documentation, that the whole story starts in the Book of Mormon about the reign of Zedekiah, and the prophets are coming in and warning that Jerusalem's going to be destroyed and people are going to be carried off. Well, reading in who wrote the Bible, it tells the history that Zedekiah was put in after that happened.
That's exactly correct.
So
yeah.
Kind of pulls the rug out of the Book of Mormon a little bit, I think.
Even the Bible says that, doesn't it?
Yes, there were actually three. Can you pull up that timeline, Bruce?
Yeah, the colored one or the other?
The other one.
Okay, yeah, just a second. I will.
This is the one I posted on Facebook, so some of you may have seen it, some of you may have not seen it. But it kind of shows the timeline between the two kingdoms, and there were actually three different. If you look up in the right-hand corner there, where it says 3 separate departures and 3 separate returns, those are when those arrows pointing up there, right around 600 BC. That is when the first Babylonian captivity happened, like in 607, I think was the year that it actually happened. I can't quite read that. But Lehi left in 600. So he left after they'd already had the first captivity, when the king had already been taken away. His son Zedekiah then became the king, and Zedekiah was the king at the time in 600 BC. Zedekiah then got hauled away when he rebelled later, but that was after Lehi supposedly left. But you are in that point where Laban and Lemuel don't believe that Jerusalem will be destroyed and won't be taken over, the great city, and it's already happened. They've already been deported, and Zedekiah was a puppet king already of the Babylonians. So
I've always felt that was a huge smoking gun. But whenever I try to explain it to people, it's like, you lost me at Zedekiah. Like, they just don't want to, you can't.
Well, that's because we don't know our Old Testament history. And that's where I thought this helped so much, is I really understood the Old Testament history from this.
Right, it's so
crime.
To answer Luann's question, though, the Mormon apologetic response to that would be that Babylonian came in, they sieged Jerusalem, they took away a lot of the elites, but they didn't destroy Jerusalem. And so we have this period of time where Babylon has basically taken over Jerusalem, but they've left it intact. Zedekiah, as Landon said, he was put in as a puppet king. When he rebelled, then the Babylonians came back in, and this time completely ransacked Jerusalem, destroyed the temple. And so the Mormon apologists would say that this is all perfectly historical, that the people didn't believe that Jerusalem could be destroyed because it hadn't been destroyed yet. They still had their temple, and that hadn't been destroyed yet. And it wasn't until after Lehi left that the Babylonians came back and actually destroyed the city. Whereas before, they just kind of sieged it and taken it over, but they'd left it intact.
Okay.
If Lehi hadn't stole those brass plates from the keeper Laban, we wouldn't have had to go through this whole process of writing something afterwards about everything that happened beforehand.
And if Laban, they'd already put it together by then we didn't need Ezra to put it together because it was already together.
Except Lehi stole it, so that
they didn't have it.
One man could die rather than a whole nation perish, but where's that nation that didn't perish? I think it perished.
He lost his head.
Definitely. So I guess the point that I look at is, we might be able to use this and go back to the Book of Mormon and say, okay, Lehi didn't have the Deuteromistic history at that point. Does he ever reference it? And if he does, then that becomes problematic too. And I didn't take the time to go through and see if that did or didn't exist, but it's certainly a thing that we could look at. JJ.
Lehi references, or Nephi at least, writes out the huge portions of Isaiah and the Book of Mormon. Now, when you look at the timeline, and this is not mentioned in the book of Isaiah covers events over a 700-year period. So it could not have been written by Isaiah or one man. And huge portions of it were actually written after 600 BC. And those are actually quoted in the Book of Mormon. So that's where, Nephi is quoting things that were never written before, were about to be written, kind of thing. In fact, there's a 50-year gap in which people feel that they were written 550 BC. Scholars like Friedman come up with these numbers. I don't know their methods. I'm not too technical on that. But that should be one of those red flags that kind of pop up. It's, wait a sec, guys. Another thing is, this came out on this video, the Lucy Code. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. Paul Travis has been writing a book, and one of these days it's going to get published, but people have been waiting for a few years, about the influences from Joseph Smith's mother on it. But he mentions a Masonic story at one of the Masonic levels, the 9th level, in which a person has to go and get the records, but the records are being procured by a specific evil guy. And technically, you have to kill this guy, cut off his head, wear his clothing, be disguised as this guy, and get the records so that the servants don't recognize you, kind of thing. Incidentally, it's a Masonic ritual, the 9th level of Masonry. I don't know the sources, but he just mentions it in this video and gives a reference. It's from a book, Morals and Dogma, by Albert Pike, who, when I looked up the book, apparently he plagiarized half the book from a French Eliphas Levi. But that's where you have this story that sounds a little too similar, kind of like Joseph Smith Sr.'s dream of a tree and
the tree of life. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Mitchell, did you have a comment? I thought I saw your hand.
So I have a question, because this always bothered me when I would read anti-Mormon literature, is why is Deutero-Isaiah such a big deal in a world where prophecy exists? Why couldn't Isaiah have written that if he had the power to see the future?
I think, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead, JJ.
I think the whole point of Isaiah is that for us in our day, when we read the book of Isaiah, it comes off as very Christian. And I think that's what Joseph Smith was trying to do, was put a huge Christian part in it. I mean, Isaiah chapter 53, word for word, is in the Book of Mormon. Until you bring in a Jewish guy into the church, someone, I can't think of his name, one of the September 6th that was excommunicated. And he gives a completely different version of it, so they kick him out of the church and then bring him back in when they realize it was kind of crazy. Gileadi, Avram Gileadi, I think.
Yeah. His ex-wife's in our ex-Mormon group in LA.
Okay.
And I think that's the argument the apologist would make is, well, he's a prophet, so he could see it. But I think all the Bible scholars look at Deutero-Isaiah and said, this is clearly written from somebody inside of Babylon. They can also tell by the versions of Hebrew that it's written in, there's a big difference between English from 1400 and 1800. And you can kind of look at that. And I think that's one of the methods they use. And I think the real telling one is that he named Cyrus by name. And that just seems so unlikely to name Cyrus by name, because obviously the Babylonians would have had those scriptures and would have known that a king named Cyrus was going to overthrow them and come back and destroy would destroy his empire. So as soon as Cyrus came to power, he would have gone and killed him, because he would have known there's a prophecy that Cyrus is going to free these people.
Seems like the Babylonians.
A little too perfect.
Seems like the Babylonians wouldn't even care about reading the Jewish scriptures. They would just see it as another legend.
Yeah, but you've got them, you've got their leaders in your court. They're part of the court, Daniel and those people were supposedly in his court. You would think they would want to be aware that there was of their scriptures and their prophecies, to avoid exactly that kind of thing, to keep them under control. They'd have experts in that, you would think. So to use a name 500 years before the person actually existed, the exact name of that person just seems way out of place. I think that's why they look at it.
Yeah, one thing this book really did with me is it just kind of reshaped the way I even look at scripture. And so when you talk about how anachronisms in the Book of Mormon that it presents, it made me not even want to read the Book of Mormon again, because I knew I would criticize it the same way. I still haven't read it since reading this book.
That's a really good point. Did you have a comment? Dick?
I just wanted to say, if Lehi or Nephi were able to see the future and write exactly what would have been written in Isaiah, there wouldn't have been a need for them to kill Laban for the brass plates. They could have written the whole thing. So that makes that narrative pretty difficult. Plus, you have Nephi. He says, I find that it has the writings of Isaiah, and he, in his storyline, copies down in his book the writings of Isaiah.
Right.
So
Nephi also says it contains the 5 books of Moses, which to even reference the Torah as the 5 books of Moses that early is a huge problem, because that was a very late tradition. For centuries, the Jews just had unauthored book of collections, and it wasn't until like in the 300 BC when they had Greek influence, this Hellenistic influence that heavily favored authorship. And now all of a sudden the rabbis say, like, well, we need to come up with who the author of these books are. And that's when they came up with the Moses tradition. So to have Nephi talking about the 5 books of Moses in 600 BC is another big anachronism. Back then it just would have been authorless books. Some of the writings of Moses, but certainly not Moses as author of all 5 books. That was a very late tradition.
Yeah. I think they call it Torah of Moses when Ezra came back is the first time. I think they call it the Torah of Moses. Isn't that what he said in this book? Didn't he call it the Torah of Moses, or did he just call it the Torah when he came back?
The Torah. And I'm not sure where Friedman stands. I just had was curious, and I read a few Wikipedia articles, which of course is my source, but that mentions that the Moses' author was even a later tradition. That wasn't until like the 300 BC when the rabbis again had a heavy Greek influence, and that Greek influence which favors authorship, where authorship is important, and that wasn't important before then. Then they came up with this tradition of Moses as author. So,
well, that kind of is a good segue into the last thing, and that's the Book of Moses, because I went back and I kind of said, okay, Friedman did this for the Old Testament, but he doesn't believe in the Book of Moses. Can I do the same thing to the Book of Moses? Can I look for J, E, P, and D, because that's supposedly supposed to be a translation of that's supposed to be a dream that Moses had or whatever. I kept getting confused as to where in the world did the Book of Moses come from in the first place. So I looked it up. I think I'm using, this is actually from the church's website. It says the Book of Moses is the Joseph Smith translation. I don't know what he was translating from, because he didn't have the original text.
It doesn't matter at all. Translation.
It doesn't matter. Yeah, of Genesis 1.
That's the answer to everything. There's no record. There's no actual.
My copy.
You don't need that.
Yeah.
My copy says it's not a translation. It's just inspired notes that he wrote.
Inspired, and that's kind of the way they're going now. But this is what the actual LDS Church, and I know you said you're fundamental, so you might have a different view. It said, as students study this book, they will gain a greater understanding of their identity and purpose as children of God. They will also learn the crucial doctrines of the creation, the fall, and the atonement of Jesus Christ. In addition, they will learn about important events and principles from the ministry of ancient prophets such as Adam, Enoch, Noah, and Moses. Who wrote this book? The Book of Moses is the prophet Joseph Smith's inspired translation of selections from the writings of Moses. It contains the words of God, which he spake unto Moses. This is in quotes from Moses chapter 1, verse 1, and commanded Moses to record. However, because of wickedness, there we go, back to the because of wickedness, many of the words and plain precious truths he recorded were obscured or lost and are thus preserved in the book of Genesis as it comes to us. Consequently, the Lord promised to raise up another prophet in the latter day to restore Moses's words so they would be had again among the children of men. So that's where the Book of Moses came from. So as I looked at the Book of Moses, as I went through the Book of Moses, the first chapter is completely a writing. Actually, the first chapter is completely a writing about this dream and how Moses was caught up into the mountain. And so it sounds like Joseph Smith has seen a vision of Moses receiving these words. And starting in chapter 2, he starts following exactly the Genesis 1 through Genesis 3. And as you start following through there, I went and just highlighted all the P passages, and then in blue, I highlighted anything that was different or had been changed. And as I went through, the first thing I found is there definitely was P and J, he follows exactly the same. So you've got him calling him God in the one, and you got him calling him Lord God, which in the King James Version, Lord God is the version for Jehovah. God is the version of Elohim. And he follows that exact same process. So as I started looking through there, I said, did Joseph Smith know PED? Did he know the documentary hypothesis? And I don't think he did. It was around, you remember, 1700s is when they started kind of figuring it out, and 1800 work was done on it. Had he heard about it? Did he know about it? I don't think he did, because he follows the pieces. You can see the pieces in there. You can clearly see J, you can clearly see P. And so for him to be having a dream of people who are writing from a different perspective, hundreds of years later, and yet Joseph has seen this dream of Moses receiving these and writing these, just didn't sit right with me. So I started looking at the differences. What did Joseph Smith add to the book of Moses that wasn't in Genesis? And it was kind of interesting to see, because although I don't think he knew P, J, E, and D, I think he recognized the doublets. He definitely recognized the doublet in the creation, because I don't think he could explain why there were two creation stories. And so when you go through it and you start looking at where he added, right where it changes from P to J, from P to J in Genesis, he inserts words, and he says, the Lord God created all things of which I've spoken spiritually before they were naturally upon the face of the earth. And several of the verses that he adds, he says, the first flesh upon the earth, the first man also, nevertheless, all things were before created, but spiritually they were created and made according to my word. So I think he saw the doublet, and he was trying to figure out how to explain that. And he did it by saying, the first story was a spiritual creation, and the second story was a physical creation. And that's why they're in different orders, and that's why it's in there twice. And I think he recognized the doublets, but he just didn't know, he didn't recognize it as two different authors. He saw two different stories, and he tried to reconcile the two. That was just, I have no idea if that's correct or not, but from the things I highlighted, every time he added, he kept talking about spiritually created, being spiritually created in that second, in the J version, but he doesn't really say that in the P version. And the other big thing that he adds really big into those is Satan. Satan is not a belief of the Old Testament. They don't know Satan. They don't understand Satan, but he fills it with everything. Garden of Eden is Satan, and Satan is very real in Moses, but it's not in J, it's not in P, it's not in E, it's not in D. It's clearly a modern insertion of this philosophy of Satan that didn't really exist back in those times. So if you want a fun Sunday activity, sit there and highlight your, at the back of the book, it has where J, E, P, D, color in different colors in your book of Moses, and start seeing what changed, and see that you can see the different versions. He did end, Moses ends before the flood, so I couldn't see what he did with the flood, two different flood stories, to see if he, caught on to the doublets in the flood story. But I thought it was kind of interesting to see the changes and what he added to the Old Testament, and the new things that he added, this philosophy of Satan. And this is where you find out Cain was black, and the different things were all added by Joseph Smith as part of that book of Moses. So to me, the documentary hypothesis really undermines the book of Moses, because there's no way he saw a vision of Moses in which Moses is writing from two different people writing hundreds of years apart. So I thought that was fascinating. But Mitchell, go ahead.
I have this book here that highlights it all for you. This is actually the first book that I got, and then I read Who Wrote the Bible after.
It's upside down. Oh, Bible and Sources Revealed. Yeah,
the Bible with Sources Revealed. So this book it just colors it differently based on who wrote what.
Oh, okay. He already colors it for you. Yeah. Okay, saves you a lot of time. He doesn't do it for the book of Moses, though, I bet. So
I think it's interesting that Joseph Smith's answer is spiritual, like spiritual eyes. You can explain everything away by saying there's a spiritual component, right? I'm not saying what I'm saying. I'm not seeing what I'm seeing. There's something otherworldly. It's a great answer to everything.
I do think, you know, you look at it and you say, Joseph Smith was a smart guy. He was not he had his moments of brilliance, and he clearly saw this. He knew the Bible. He understood these things. I mean, I couldn't write a book and tell you Zedekiah was the king in 600 BC when I was 20 something years old. So he had knowledge, no doubt about it. It's just, you know, you can look at it and take it however each person wants to, but it's just another option that you can look at, that the documentary hypothesis helps you to look at scripture and look at different things. So that's
comment, JJ.
Yeah, Jay.
I was thinking, lately we've been hearing a lot about Adam Clarke and Joseph Smith's access to the works of Adam Clarke. So I wonder how much the Book of Moses takes Adam Clarke.
That's a good point.
I know that a person has gone through the Book of Mormon, at least every part where it says Joseph Smith translation, where people are thinking, well, how could Joseph Smith have known that? Today, it's very obvious that he had a book by Adam Clarke, and it seemed like he highlighted everything. Grant Palmer also felt that he read quite a bit of Swedenborg. At the time, it's just he hasn't figured out or pinpointed certain books, but the works of Swedenborg were available in the public libraries or at the time to Joseph Smith. In particular with Swedenborg, he mentions Aaronic priesthood and 3 degrees of glory, which should kind of raise some eyebrows with anybody here, I guess, any Mormon at least.
That's a good point. I didn't think of, did Adam Clarke write these sections as opposed to Joseph Smith? That's fairly new that came out. So that's another interesting place you can delve into and look at.
Yeah.
Mitchell is trying to talk, I think.
There were a lot of Swedenborgians who joined the church, and I think one of them even married Joseph Smith.
Yep, I heard that.
When I started reading the writings of Swedenborg, I noticed they were very similar to what I was taught, but the stuff that isn't really taught by the Mormon church, like the idea of that each person has a spouse assigned to them before they were born. That's a Swedenborgian idea. And I think that, to me, that seems like more of a family tradition because my ancestors are from Sweden. And so I can tell there was a lot of that influence, but I never quite figured out what it was.
That's fascinating.
Well, I'll turn the time over to Dale to introduce the next book. Is a great conversation. Appreciate everybody's insight. Just a sec, Nelson, and I'll give. We are looking, Rebecca. I think you're looking for people to host or lead a discussion. I think Tom has volunteered for one.
I mean, you know, it just means that you kind of talk more than I would be talking. So I don't talk all the time. So no.
Look at the list.
Before we go over to Dale, I'll just say again, if anybody is new and would like to jump on our Facebook page where we kind of have real-time information and engage, you can send me a friend request on Facebook to Rebecca Biblioteca, that's THECA, and then I'll invite you. It's a private group, totally closed. And you could also just email thegoodbookclub@mail.com if you want instructions on how to do that. So we have a lot of fun on the Facebook page. So Nelson, did you have one more comment as we're leaving?
Yeah, and this kind of comes from my extra credit. But I think
let me just say, Nelson is amazing. He not only finished the book in really great time, then on our Facebook page, he's like, wait, I moved to the New Testament. I'm reading more. So yeah, he's our star student today.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that. I don't know how much of that I understand. But they talk at one point in the very beginning of this book, he says this, with the New Testament, you could probably put the Bible in here as a whole, the Old and New, is commonly viewed and treated as a charter document that came into being much like the Constitution of the United States. According to this view, the authors of the New Testament were all present at the beginning of the new religion and collectively wrote all the stuff down. Then he goes through and he says, but the problem with this is, and then he documents where the timeline of the Pauline letters, the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel of Luke. And then he says, here's a part I really like, the next paragraph. To make matters worse for the conventional view, these writings stem from different groups with their own histories, views, attitude, and a mix of peoples. And I think that's where we all get it. All comes from, even the Old Testament, the New Testament. It comes from the difference of people's views, their societies, and their histories as it's all put together. So, but I think we do oftentimes have people think that, oh no, this was, like he says, like the Constitution. These people all sat down together and they wrote all this out at one time, and that's the founding basis for Christianity, founding basis of Islam, if you go back there. And we just know that that's not the way it came about, however else you might look at it. But that way, we know that just is not the way it happened.
That's a great point. And I think maybe we should cover the New Testament, maybe next year. I mean, that's fascinating. It's a natural next choice. So awesome. Okay, Dale, tell us about Educated. That is what we are going to be reading for December. Hopefully a little easier read since it is, December. Get her to chime in. Gosh, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, Dale has volunteered to lead that discussion. He told me that he and his wife had just read it. So go ahead, Dale, give us a
Yeah, that's right. Educated. It's by Tara Westover. She is she grew up in southeastern Idaho. Her parents were really Orthodox, more so than my parents were, to the point where her dad felt like the school system was too liberal, and so she and her siblings were homeschooled. And this book kind of hit close to home for me because I actually had a couple of friends growing up whose father took all the kids out of school because he thought the school was too liberal and of the devil. And so he had his wife homeschool the kids, and then his job became of the devil. So he quit his job and his wife had to go teach school and teach the kids at home. Anyway, there's some parallels between her story and some of my friends' stories, and even some of my story as well, coming from small town Utah, with my ancestry going back into the 1840s, some of the beginnings of the church. So it's her journey of from where she was in a very Orthodox Mormon family to being educated, and that's kind of that's the name of the book. Super interesting. My wife actually, one of her friends told her about it, and my wife read it, told me it was really, really cool. I don't remember if that was before or after I started going through my faith crisis, but here earlier this year, we decided to read it together. And it was super interesting. It's one of my wife's favorite books. We'll see if she can join with me when we go through this. So I've gone through faith crisis. She's still an active believing member, and but really enjoyed this book. And we found through reading this book that I had a much different upbringing than she did. Mine was much more Orthodox, almost along the lines of Tara Westover, and hers was much more nuanced. And it's created, it helped us understand where we are right now a little better. So it's a little background.
And apparently Tara's mother has now written her memoirs. That's not a rebuttal to what Tara did, according to what I found. But so she's written a book out there as well. It looks like it's a self-published book, and you can buy it on Amazon. Tara's mother has apparently a business where she does essential oils and other things that has some books about holistic healing and holistic medicine type stuff. So, depending where I get, and if I get ambitious and want to do a little more extra credit, I might try and read that one too. But I just found that interesting, and I found this. I don't know if how many of you had an opportunity to watch her the presidential lectures or whatever it was from Utah Valley. That used to be Utah Tech, didn't it?
Now we're University. Yeah, I have that on our Facebook page. Maybe I'll repost it because that was an excellent interview. And
I was going to just say she's all over YouTube. She's interviewed with Oprah. She did a whole junket when she did the book. It's really interesting to watch her. She's with Bill Gates. I mean, she went right to the top. She's talking all these.
Just Google her if you want some extra.
I hadn't found all that stuff, but it was something. It was a comment. It was a very passing comment in that interview that they were doing that she had mentioned it, and Tara didn't really say much about it. She goes, yeah, she's written a book, and that was where she left it. So that,
Educating. So,
right.
Sounds like a role, sort of, but.
So I'll have to go see, and I did see some of the newspaper articles about the mother's book, but I didn't know that I hadn't seen anything on the Oprah and any of that other stuff. So, but very interesting to me, somebody that finds this whole, being in the world and taking access, that's how you're making your money now, to be getting on Oprah and going to Bill Gates, who found Tara's book to be on the best reading list. I just find that kind of interesting.
Yeah, she's done a 180. No, I'm excited to read it. I'm like Dale. I was raised very fundamental Orthodox. I mean, we probably have a lot in common. So, and then the month after December is going to be January, and that's going to be Jana Reese's The Next Mormon. Her huge study, a statistic analysis of just, where people in the church are and what's happening. And Tom, who's gone to a couple of lectures of hers and has some connection to her, is going to lead that one. So we'll talk more about. And so really, if anybody wants to look through the book list and just lead a discussion, it just kind of means, talking more than me, like I said. So I'd love it. It'd be great. So any more comments? Are we done? Gosh, we've talked for 2 hours. It just goes like that. I just love it. I hope that you guys enjoy this as much as I do. It's just wonderful. Yes, Bruce.
Yeah, our next gathering is December 13th. 11 o'clock Mountain, 10 o'clock Pacific time.
Okay. Yes, Brian. Or are you just saluting out? He's just signing off. There we go.
No.
Your head got
I was going to say,
it was Benny Hill.
No, that's all right. I was going to say, sorry, I was protecting my eyes from the sun. I was going to say, Tara Westover's done a number of podcast interviews. If anyone's interested in finding those, you could just Google, I'm sure, her name and podcast, and you'll find a number of. I know Oprah interviewed her. She was on Mormon Stories, and so you may find those interesting as you read the book this month as well. So.
Excellent. Well, let's get reading, and please share comments and things on Facebook. I love that when somebody will write something and we'll all, write back and forth about what we're learning and the insights. I love that during the month. If you'd like to, I think that's really fun. So, all right. Well, signing out. Thank you, everybody. Bye. Have a great rest of your Sunday.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
The Zoom doubles.
Yeah, the double wave.
The doubles.
Zoom.
We don't do this anywhere else in our working life. We do it here on Zoom. All right.
Thanks, Bruce. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, Landon. Good job, Landon. Thank you. Thank you.
Tomorrow.
I'm going to call you guys.